You guys, I'm so glad there's more than 2 people here. You come to a horse symposium or horse conference and talk about goats. That sounds like a great idea, right? Although, I will say, once you guys leave here, you're going to tell everybody you should have gone to the goat lady, because I'm going to tell you about a journey that I went on that might change a perspective or two in here. So my name is Alice Clarkson. I am the incredibly, and I usually cry when I say this, but I'm going to cry, the incredibly grateful shepherdess of a super cool herd of goats. Okay, I'm only going to cry once. My journey started with horses, and I went to college for horses. I had a dream that I was sure, because at 13 I accepted Christ, I was sure at 18 that God only wanted me to be a horse trainer. That's it. I want you to raise and breed standardbred horses. I was going to change the world because I fell in love with standardbreds, which nobody loves standardbreds, right? They have this giant Roman nose and who gets close to them? But my dream was to make sure that they all found homes after the track. And so I thought the best way to do that was to work on a big farm. I got to work there for 2 years after college. And then God said, I've been trying to tell you this isn't the plan. And he moved me along. All that to say, following God's plan for your life is a big part of what I'm going to talk about today. But it's not the only part. It's just knowing and understanding that creation matters, and his plan for us to incorporate creation, which includes all animals, right? It includes every tree, every blade of grass, every bit of mud. It all matters when we touch it, because when we touch it, we can plant seeds. I loved what Stephanie said last night about the good soil, because having animals on your land creates good soil, right? And good soil is where the seeds grow. So back to my story. So I left Canada, where I'm from, and where I thought I was going to change the world with standardbred horses. And I worked also on a huge ranch. We had 250 acres and 60 horses, and we ran a big summer camp program for kids. We had a huge portion of them that were sponsored and were scholarship. So you can see my background kind of leads me to a perfect place of fitting in here, except now I raise therapy goats. And that's where you're like, what? But I was also a chef for 20 years. And in those 20 years, God was gently pushing me through the process. I raised my own kids. You know, baby goats are kids. So I was almost there. I'm like, God, I think I got you. I'm going to be a chef. And he's like, no. But keep trying, Alice. You're close, right? Keep trying. So raised my own kids. And being a chef, I sort of fell in love with cheese. When I fell in love with cheese, I feel like that's when the Lord really started dropping the hints that he was going to put me where he has me right now. And I thought, I used to have a goat, and I always thought that a goat's real purpose was to take a horse that was grumpy around other horses and have a friend. I'm like, well, that's what goats are for, right? Goats are for keeping problem. I had a mare. Oh my gosh, that mare. She would drop her baby and get so lonely that she would scream and kick and try to take down the barn. But when she would get out with the other mares, she would annihilate them. And I'm sure you've all met problem mares like that, where you're like, what is wrong with you? So I got her a goat. And she loved that goat. That goat was like her baby. And I thought, well, that's what a goat is for. And then I became a chef, and I'm like, oh, well, wait, there's also cheese. So I think I'm going to get a couple goats. At the time, we had a 31-year-old quarter horse who was going blind. And my thought was, well, if I incorporate some goats, maybe she'll have friends and they'll help her see. And that did happen. The goats spent a lot of time with CJ, our quarter horse. We had her for 2 more years. She passed peacefully with goats sleeping right beside her. All that to say, I did make a really great tasting goat cheese, but in that process, I came upon Proverbs 27:27. Proverbs 27:27, you guys, is where the Lord was leading me, I believe, until he changes my life again, the whole time. Proverbs 27:27 is, I will provide goat milk for you, for your household, for your maidservants, for everyone. I will provide goat milk. Well, you can't have the milk without the animal. In order to have the milk, you need to have an intimate relationship with milk that's provided. Cow's milk is also mentioned in Scripture. It's mentioned in Isaiah. In Isaiah, it says if you have 1 cow and 2 goats, you will have enough milk. So we're meant to also drink cow's milk, but there's a more intimate, when he talks about maidservants in that verse, a maidservant also includes a wet nurse. And a wet nurse is someone who is still lactating, who feeds babies whose mothers have stopped lactating. We don't really do that anymore, but goats, believe it or not, do. And here's where I dove in to goats. In the United States and Canada, it is very uncommon for goats to be used for anything else other than meat and pasture partners. You know, they get purchased to keep company of other animals because they bond so well. But the truth is, goats, you guys, if you have an existing equine farm where you're using them as a ministry partner, goats will fit right in there. They are incredibly trainable. They are incredibly intelligent. I call them barn puppies. All they want to do is be beside you. Their only goal in life is to be right in your pocket. And it's not because of food. They have a voracious appetite, which is why petting zoos use them. So in a petting zoo situation, you get a little cup of grain and you get monkeys climbing all over you because these little goats try to eat this grain. And if you can imagine, if you went into a nursery school and someone said to you, I want you to read a story to the 3-year-olds, but first we're going to give them a whole bag full of Snickers. You can imagine what would happen. Same is true of goats. So on my farm, and this is where I want you to sort of take notes, I dove into goats. I dove into, like, how does the rest of the world use them? Like, we don't use them well. God obviously provided them for us. Why don't we use them the way the rest of the world uses them? In Europe, they are in every village. In the Middle East, in Africa, in India, everywhere. They're in every village. They are an intimate part of daily life where people are constantly touching them, they smell them, they drink from them, they eat them, and they're a huge part of daily life, but not in North America. And how did that happen? And so I dove deep. And what I found was that when we touch provision, I really feel like goats are a great example of the enemy taking Scripture and shifting it so that we don't understand it anymore. When we touch provision, a horse is provision, grass is provision, sheep are provision. That's also mentioned in Proverbs 27. And they're mentioned as clothing us. Goats are meant to feed us, and they do it in so many amazing ways. So we'll start at the top, and the top is the milk. Chemically, goat milk is almost identical to human milk. We can drink it straight from the udder, and in fact, in villages where they have no refrigeration, they do. If a baby loses its mother, or the mother loses milk, they will actually let human children suckle from goats. Now, that sounds a little crazy to all of us, but to them it's life, and it's Scripture come alive. It's, I will provide goat milk for you. From a therapeutic side and from a ranch ministry side, if you incorporate goats into your ministry as a side dish, to jump on the goat cheese part, a side dish to horses. For me on my farm, the way we use them, I mostly deal with nonverbal, wheelchair-bound adults and children. So for horses, it's complicated. A lot of them, they can go on a horse, and sometimes they do. I partner with quite a large farm near us that does a lot of therapeutic riding. But then they will send the others to me. And it's not a less than choice. It's just a smaller choice that you don't ride on. But they still offer just as much. So we'll start at the milk. Then let's go to the animal itself. Goats are self-cleaning. They groom themselves like a cat. They produce manure that has almost no odor and is the only livestock manure that is considered a cold manure. It can go straight into a garden and grow plants, versus cow, sheep, cattle, all has to be aged. But goats, their manure is so dry because they're so drought tolerant that it basically crumbles like dust, as long as you keep it separate from hay, right? Any manure combined with hay, and I think you probably all know this, turns into a hot, stinky mess in no time. But goat manure is very special. We call them goat berries because they look like blueberries. They're different. A goat is a caprine. It's different from every other ruminant on the planet. They are specifically provision. And when you come in contact with provision, you guys, your life just changes. So, manure is cold. Another amazing thing about them is that they are incredibly in tune to humans. They were literally built to have a shepherd. When they're born, they stand up. If they can't see their mom, the first thing they do is walk towards a human. And it can be any human. I have proven this time and time again. My herd loves me, and I know they do. But it's okay if I'm not there when the babies are born. As long as a human is there, they recognize the shepherd in everybody. Everybody. Even if you have wheels, even if you don't speak, these goats recognize that humans are shepherds, and that every human to them is a shepherd. Whether they're this big, they're verbal or not, these goats will walk and stand beside a wheelchair. I have a training program, but it really is more of a conditioning program. They're trained, conditioned in 12 weeks to do everything you need them to do for the rest of their life. As long as you keep the same things going, which is don't feed them Snickers and love them, respect them and love them. So now we've talked about manure. Now let's talk about what they eat, because this is where the real miracle of incorporating goats into your already existing livestock program, especially horses, really matters. Goats eat what we would consider garbage. They love weeds. They love the grossest hay you could ever imagine. Not moldy hay, I don't mean that, but if you were, as a horse owner, if you were to open the hay that I buy, you would say, what on earth? Like, there's sticks in here. Because I often have sticks in my hay. My hay guy cuts a very specific field for me. I get 600 bales a year for 20 goats, and it smells great. It smells like flowers, but it literally, you open it up and you have to wear gloves because it is so pokey, so sticky, so like weedy, you would never give it to a horse. A horse would turn its head and say, I'm not eating that. But goats dive in head first, bury their whole face in it, and they eat everything but the grass. That's the amazing thing about goats. They do not eat grass. In fact, they leave the grass for other animals to eat. They'll eat every leafy weed. They'll eat everything that hurts horses. They eat poison ivy, giant hogweed, wild parsnip. They eat brambles. They eat, and they turn all of that into cold manure and milk. It's a miraculous provision. And on top of that, they love people. Challenge-wise, fencing, for sure, is a challenge. If you don't give them a reason to stay where they are, the grass is always greener. But if you make them a place where they don't ever have to worry about greener grass, because they truly don't like grass. So if you give them, you can cut down limbs. Like when you're cutting down, we often will trim our backwoods, and it has a lot of wild raspberries that grow. They love wild raspberries right down to the root. And I'm talking about the really big thorns. They eat the whole thing. They do not ever get hurt eating that. It's unbelievable. They can go into a pasture filled with poison ivy, eat all of it, and come out without a single mark on them. Not only that, but somehow, because they groom themselves, you can touch them after eating an entire field of poison ivy, and you won't get poison ivy. They're a miracle. They're a miracle of provision. So we've talked about manure, we've talked about the milk, we've talked about the animal. Now let's talk about how it works when people come in contact with them. So for me, the way I do it, my barn is set up. It is a 24 by 36 foot barn, so not big. I have 20 goats in there. The first 12 feet of the barn, when you walk in, is sort of a gathering area. It's also where I milk. So 12 feet by 36 feet. I also have a little soap store, is all for humans. And then there's a small gate there. Yeah? What kind of goats do you have? I'm going to get into that in just one second. So then I have a small gate there. And on the other side, because I breed miniature goats, so my main goat of choice is a mini La Mancha. I highly recommend you get mini La Manchas. And if you have to breed them yourself, do that. Start with a La Mancha and get a Nigerian dwarf buck and start breeding your own goats. Their gestation is 5 months. But anyways, to continue, so the rest of that, so we're talking about just 24 feet by 24 feet is my barn. And there's 20 goats in there. It's a wooden floor. They love wooden floors. They don't need to have a fancy barn. My barn is Amish built and it was delivered in 2 pieces. It's basically a giant Amish shed, but it's a 24 by 36 shed. I have 2 open doors so that we can have wheelchairs that come in and out. My biggest struggle is power wheelchairs, but I think everyone's struggle is power wheelchairs. They're complicated, they're heavy, the wheels are small. But so people come in, this is where the magic happens. Goats, they don't kick, they don't bite, and conditioned properly, they don't headbutt. They will headbutt each other, and it's a misconception that they will headbutt humans. When trained and conditioned properly, they would never do that because they recognize that you're the shepherd, and why on earth would they hurt their shepherd? They won't do it when conditioned and trained properly. And that's where the training comes in. So when people come in, all they are doing is touching, smelling, being near an animal that recognizes that they are the shepherd that is there to protect them. And you can instantly see the connection happen. It happens right in front of you without a ton of equipment. I use dog collars. I get them on Amazon. I use dog leashes. I get them on Amazon. The lighter the leash and the lighter the collar, the better, because they really don't like to have a collar on them. Brushes, I get in the clearance section at the drugstore because people do like to brush them, but they don't need a curry comb because they groom themselves. Hoof trimmers, I buy them at Home Depot. They're just garden shears, and you can do that yourself. So we're talking about an animal that can be incorporated into your already existing plan without too much trouble and without too much effort. In fact, a lot of what you already have in place might be enough. Even just a stall is a good place to start. But then comes the fencing. So goats and electric fencing are the best option. So you would have to, if you were incorporating them into your fence, you would have to put a lower, they will respect it, a lower wire than a horse. If you use 3-wire fencing, you'd have to go in between the very lowest and the middle and get them where their nose is. Because as long as their nose gets jolted, they will never challenge fencing. I use cattle panels because I only have goats, I don't have horses. Thank you, Lord. I use cattle panels. Cattle panels are great because they can stand on them, but they can't climb over them. So they're just sturdy enough where they can get up, but it's not like wood where they could hop up and hop over. I've never had my goats escape in 6 years other than when I've left the gate open. So that was my own fault. But in 6 years, they've never escaped. A big part of that is that I make sure that they have as much hay as they can eat. And again, if you're already in an existing equine operation, you get a delivery of hay every time you get a bale, because it happens a lot. Even, beautiful first cut hay often has a bale or two that you're like, they're not going to eat this. You put that aside and you give it to your goats, and they will eat all of it. When your pastures are just growing up and you're watching your horses walk around and you can see the clumps, I'm sure everybody has. You've got clumps where you're like, well, they're never going to eat that, and you go out with a weed whacker. Instead, you walk out with your goats and they'll eat it in a matter of minutes. And suddenly you're good. You're good to go. Now let's talk about breed for a minute. There are about 500 breeds of goats. We really, on this continent specifically, and I would even include Mexico and Canada in this. So subsidies have made it so that cattle are the main form of dairy and meat. And we don't think about goats. Other parts of the world, they don't have the infrastructure to handle cattle. So they use goats. And obviously, I mean, let's talk about Jesus for a minute, right? There were goats everywhere, and that's where they got their dairy, that's where they got their meat, was mostly from goats. So infrastructure-wise, it is an easier process to bring the goats in, but the breed matters. Why did I choose Mini La Manchas? So Mini La Mancha, two things. The Mini La Mancha, and if you look them up or if you've ever gone to a fair and seen them, they're the ones that don't have the outside ear flap. That outside ear flap makes them look really silly, but the truth is they are perfectly suited for cold climates. If you're around here, it does get kind of cold. Nubians and Nigerian dwarf are both from Africa. The African goats are great, but their ears can be problematic. Believe it or not, they can get frostbite. The La Manchas do not have an outside ear flap. They are also, out of all the goats, they are the calmest, kindest, most gentle, sweet-tempered of every goat. And the key to that is they're the quietest. My goats make almost no noise, which is very rare with goats. They can be very vocal. They can be vocal when something's wrong. So if you're not feeding them on time, somebody's hurt, there's a predator, they will guard your horses from every predator that comes near. If a strange dog or a cat, or, you know, we don't get it very often, but every once in a while a fox or a coyote comes near the fence, I know because they will set off an alarm call like you've never heard, and they all stand in a row. And if you've ever seen 18 mama goats standing in a row, you know you're not going over there. And that's the way the predators feel. They won't challenge a goat. And it doesn't matter if they have horns or not. I don't disbud on my farm, but I breed both polled and horned goats. My goats weigh between 45 and 60 pounds. Every once in a while, I will get a wether that might get closer to 100. A strange thing happens with goats. When you wether them, they grow more. So weathering is castrating, and when you do it, for some reason, the bucks get bigger, or the boys get bigger. Goats will not interfere with your breeding program if they're a wether, which is a little different than having a gelding around. I know on our farm we used a gelding as a teaser. We would bring him in and he would get all studdy. Well, the boys in the goat world don't do that. So you can have a whole herd of weathered males, and they are like having puppies around. Amazing, gentle, kind puppies. So with having goats and knowing and understanding that this is what God wanted, it kind of put me in this place where I thought to myself, how am I going to make sure that I am breeding the right goat and bringing the right goat to other farms, because I sell about 30 to 40 babies a year. They leave my farm fully trained, and they go off to either families. We go in front of town boards to make sure they can get them, because here's the amazing thing about goats. They fall in the same category as chickens in almost every state in this country. So if you're allowed to have a chicken, which most people, well, or 6, most states require 6, you can have a goat. You should have 2. But you can have goats, which is just remarkable. So I breed these guys to fit into small operations. And that includes horse farms. So I've worked now, I'm on my 10th horse farm that I have sold baby goats to, where they incorporate them as part of their therapy. And it might be something as simple as you've got 4 kids ready and waiting to mount, and you need to distract the 3 because you're working on 1. If you have a stall filled with goats that are gentle and kind and sweet, They can go and sit in there and just pet them and love them and spend time with them. And suddenly your process of getting everybody mounted and ready is easier. Or if you're working with one horse and 3 or 4 children and you're rotating them through, you can use goats as a gentle kind. It's almost like giving them a puppy to play with, except they don't bite. And they never would. They only have teeth on the bottom. Like, they are the most beautiful form of provision I've ever seen. On my farm, when I watch kids and adults, and so my farm is mainly dealing with adults and children with autism. When I see them touch provision, you can just witness the Holy Spirit being there with them. And it's the most incredible thing I've ever seen. I never in a million years thought I would be in a place where I could actually share not only my love of Jesus, but also my love of creation, because I am in awe of creation. This planet that we've been given to steward is mind-boggling. And goats are a big part of it, believe it or not. They could save this planet before an electric car could, and especially here in the US. We just don't use them enough. And a big part of it is you will not need to spray your fields for anything. Your manure pile, your compost pile, will be healthier because of the goat manure, because it is a cold manure. It changes the dynamic of the biodome in your manure pile. The level of gifts that you get from adding something as simple as a goat is just mind-boggling. Anyways, okay, I'll open it up to questions. Yeah?
How much do you sell your babies for?
How much do I sell the babies for? So that's a great question. So for me, they are not the main part of my income structure. So I make goat milk soap. The Lord blessed me. I was a chef for 20 years. Making soap is cooking. So for me, I sell them for $250 each, because you have to buy 2, $500. It does feel cheap. The truth is, I'm still making money on them. Gestation, this is a big part of it. Gestation is 5 months, 12 weeks, and you've got a trained animal. So $250 is just fine.
How old are they when you let them go?
12 weeks. Yep. Yes.
The La Mancha breed, you said it's because it doesn't have an ear flap, it's good for the cold.
Mm-hmm.
What about in Florida? Is it okay in a hot climate?
Yes, so the question is, do La Manchas do well in hot weather? So here's an incredible thing about goats. Goats can live anywhere on this planet except Antarctica. They love the heat. The only thing they don't love is rain. You will not have a single goat that will stand in the rain. They think 1 raindrop is way too much, and they don't like flies and they don't like bees. That's why they're meant to live with us. They don't like bugs, they eat weeds, their manure is not offensive, but yes, they love the heat. They love it.
So in a forest environment, you have to keep fly spray on them?
They actually will they just stomp their feet and walk away. But it's so funny, if you watch them, they actually look annoyed that a fly even landed on them. They're like, ugh. And they walk away. Like, can you believe it? No, they're amazing. They're amazing. They'll actually, because their manure is a cold manure, no flies really go near their manure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So we had Nigerian dwarfs for a while,
Mhm.
and one of them had gotten worms,
Mm-hmm.
and we tried everything to save this little baby, and wound up losing
Yeah.
him. What do you do about that?
Parasite. So the question's about parasite control. So parasite control for any livestock is always an issue. For goats in particular, if they get it as a baby, they can go downhill fast. So on our farm, our parasite structure is weekly. I check their FAMANCHA score. So you check under their eyelid weekly and make sure it's red to pink. If it is not, I use herbal wormers year round. And then if I catch that it's looking pale, I will treat them. I do a whole herd fecal test once a year just to see what I'm dealing with in the herd. That is a complicated part of goats. But also, they themselves, if you give them the chance, are parasite resistant. They do not like to eat anything on the ground. If you always give them the choice of eating up high, they won't get worms. They won't get parasites. In the Northeast, meningeal worm is probably the scariest, and it's probably what took your little guy down. Nigerian dwarfs are not known for their parasite resistance. Another reason why the La Mancha is such a hardy breed, and one that I highly recommend, is that they are naturally parasite resistant. Nigerian dwarfs, because they are a highly sought after breed, just like any highly sought after breed, eventually you sort of breed the wildness or the feralness. There's not really any wild goats. That's another beautiful thing. They're almost all feral. They've almost all been released. But that feralness, by line breeding, you sort of breed that out. And we see it in horses too, right, where you have them that are more susceptible. But that Famancha it's your best tool. So you're just checking them once a week.
What's the specific herbal?
So there's a few different ones. So the question was what herbs to use while to treat. So rosemary is wonderful, mint and wild oregano. So I actually broadcast spread, you grow it. So my pasture is filled with mint and oregano. And I just, every time I see seeds on sale, I just throw it out there. And they eat it constantly. Yeah, I have almost no grass in my pasture because it's all just leafy things that the goats will go out and eat. The downside, and I wasn't thinking about this, is wild oregano has these beautiful purple flowers and it gets covered in bees, and the goats will not go out and eat it in the sunshine. They're just like, there's a bee, I'm going in the barn. Yeah, but oregano, rosemary, and mint. Yeah.
So we actually have some goats. We have a Nubian
Yeah.
and 2 Nigerian dwarf goats, and we're planning on breeding them this fall just because they do so well with the kids.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great.
One thing we do have trouble with though, it seems like once our moms have gotten to be like around 4, they got this headbutting issue.
Okay, so I was talking to your husband. So the question was about the headbutting issue. Yes. So here's the thing, and this is the honest truth. If you think about a goat and a shepherd, right, and that you have to get in the mentality of you are a shepherd, and so your job is to guide them to food. Your job is not to feed them. So when on my farm, the way we resolve that, because I've never had that happen, we never, ever, ever incorporate food and love in the same place. So even when I'm feeding them, I walk in, I feed them, I don't talk to them, I don't make eye contact, I don't touch them, because a shepherd wouldn't do that. A shepherd would guide them to a place to eat, and then he would sit, or she would sit. Wouldn't help them, wouldn't touch them, because they would be walking, and then they would come back to rest. And then they would come back when they wanted attention. And so that's the way, and I think it would work on your farm too. So your husband was saying you put a bale of hay in when the kids are petting them. Yep. And I'll be honest, if I do see kids even trying to feed the goats, I have a huge sign up that says we don't need to be fed. And even I don't, like, even when I'm milking them, and I love my goats so much, when I pour the grain in, I'm not even that gentle. I dump it in there and then I back away. And I can say after 7 years of doing this, I might be onto something. Because I really do think if you keep food as food and love as love, which is really hard for us because that's not the way we work, right? We work and that, but if you think to yourself, I'm a shepherd would not ever feed and pet the goats, ever. You would bring them to food and then walk back and sit down. And they come back to you for rest. So I think you could easily stop that from happening. Your husband gave me his card. I think we're doing a little, like, we're going to get some La Manchas to you guys and help you. Petting zoos are, I mean, anytime people can touch animals is a great thing. I do think petting zoos do goats a huge disservice because people assume that they're voracious eaters, which they are, and that they're too rough, which they are when they're eating. If you watch goats eat, they are not kind to each other. But if you watch them love, they are very kind to each other. And so knowing the difference and getting over that, like when you're with a horse even, you know, it's such a intimate, gentle, kind thing to hold food up to and feel their lips on your hand. I mean, that's a part of a therapeutic interaction with a horse. It's not with a goat. It's not. It's a lot of jumping. It's a lot of like, rah, and that's not fun. Yeah. Yes?
What about pygmies though?
Pygmy goats? Questions about pygmy goats? So pygmies are not as, they're hardier, definitely, than Nigerian dwarfs. Now, I do use a Nigerian dwarf buck every year because I like to keep my, that's how you get mini versions of any of the big goats. They've all got Nigerian dwarf blood in them. But you're diluting it at that point anyways, so, but pygmies are great. I just don't have a reliable source for a pygmy buck. But pygmies are great.
Pygmies just as good, like therapy goats?
Oh, absolutely. Truthfully, any goat, goats across the board have the exact same temperament and personality. Some of them are just very big. Like a full-size Nubian wether, his head can be up here,
Well,
you know.
that's my guy, and Boyd does like to do a little bucking,
Mm-hmm.
there is no food around. Now, and not that he's mean, because
Right.
he's as sweet as can be, but he wants to play, and
Sure.
he is huge.
Yeah, the big goats are harder.
Yeah,
Yep.
so that's the only concern I would have, you know, putting my guys in with, you know, any kids.
Yeah, yeah.
He can
Now,
play
how
pretty
old
well.
is he?
He is turning, he turned, 4 or 5 this past, May.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was 4 or 5. I think it's 4.
So he's totally full grown and has got his, but if he had been, if you had conditioned him from the beginning that, you know, there's never food involved with love, there's never, he would be a different animal. It's not that he would be less or more friendly, because it sounds like he's very, very friendly. Yeah, and that's just a goat's nature, is to be friendly. He just wouldn't associate food with anything or excitement. Like, I don't, and I know this is going to sound strange, but I don't let my goats get excited. And how do I do that? Because I don't get excited around them. You know, I'm always walking. I never run. And if I did run, they would think something was wrong. And they would probably all chase me and make me fall and be like, Mom, what's the matter? And on the farm, luckily, most people who come aren't able to run. So that's never an issue for me.
So playing with them when they're little and pushing them.
We don't do that. Nope.
Because it's funny.
It's funny.
Yeah, when they get to be, you know.
Yep. You've got to think about what you want your adult goat to be like. So somebody asked me earlier out there, oh, I love the bouncy part. And I said, I know everybody does, but the truth is they only do that as a rule for about 4 weeks, and then they don't bounce anymore. They just want to lay down, walk, and sleep, if that's what you teach them to do. So just like a horse, foals are adorable, you know, foals when they rear up and they kick, but you immediately stop that because it's not cute if they're doing that when they weigh 700 pounds. It might be cute when they weigh 150 pounds. Well, the same is true of goats. My babies are between 1.5 and 3 pounds each. It is adorable when they jump and leap. I mean, it's crazy cute, but one of the first things I teach them is how to wear a collar and a leash, and I stop them from doing that. Even the little guys. You know, I have one little baby right now. She still only weighs 16 pounds. I don't think she's going to be much over 40 pounds full grown. She is adorable, and I don't even pick her up anymore. I could, but I don't. And so it happens fast. They're so smart. By 12 weeks, if you can imagine a 12-week-old foal, how trained they would be. It's not very trained, you know, but a 12-week-old goat will respect you and follow your rules and get along and be kind and sweet and gentle. Yeah, many other questions? Yeah.
What's the longevity of a goat?
Like a dog, so 12, 15 years. And same applies, same logic. The bigger the goat, the shorter their lifespan, and the smaller the goat. So you could get a 20-year-old Nigerian dwarf, for sure. Their feet are the main thing. Their area has to be dry. Your husband was saying you use shingles. on, oh, your husband was saying you use shingles. That's a great, we do that too, the asphalt shingles. We also use Velcro to groom them. So we have a big board with Velcro on it, and they just rub back and forth and back and forth. Yep, it is the cutest thing. You guys, I'm a horse girl at heart. I can't encourage you enough that your property will be changed for the better if you add goats to your property.
Did he tell you about the goat snuggling?
Yes.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. Just awesome.
Yeah, at our local fair, they have like 30, I think it was 31 little, I think they were pygmies.
Yeah, I think he said pygmies.
And
Yep.
They were pygmy goats, and they charged $5 for
Which is
people to go
crazy.
in. Yeah.
Yeah.
For people to go
So-
in and goat snuggle.
One thing about my farm, and if I could encourage you guys all, you could take a look at my website at what we do. So it's rowandaleTherapyGoats.com. I don't charge for what people get on the farm. I don't charge for it. I never will. The Lord has been very firm with me. I shouldn't say never. I'm sorry, God. Every time I say never, I go home and I'm like, oh, I guess I'm doing that now. So for now, he has encouraged me that he just wants people to touch creation from my farm. That's what he wants. And I think his plan for all of us is very clear as soon as you find that your will and his will are the same, or your dream and his will are the same. And that's the place I'm in right now. So we don't charge. I have volunteers that come out and they volunteer to come and cuddle the babies. And when they come, the difference between what that is and what I do is that they're not just cuddling. Like week 1, they're cuddling and holding feet. Week 2, they might be touching and opening a mouth and also cuddling. Week 3, they are on a leash and they are learning to walk and they're learning to behave. But it's always done with cuddling, because I'll tell you what, all they want to do is snuggle. They just want to snuggle. Even as adults, I have one adult, her name's Coda. She's 5 years old, and when I come in, she looks at me and I can just tell, I'm like, Coda, please, not now. But she comes right on my lap, she puts her head on my shoulder, and she just goes, oh. And you can just feel that she's connected. I feel very much that I am her shepherdess, and she trusts me. She wants to be near me. She loves me in the capacity that she can, And as long as we honor and respect creation and provision, amazing things happen. Amazing things. Yeah. Yeah.
There's so many things are going through my mind, how how the Lord feeds us with his word, and when we hear his voice, and then the love that comes.
Oh, for sure.
with that.
Yes.
I mean, the analogies here are incredible. I was in Burkina Faso, Africa, building some water wells with a missionary there, and they were having a celebration one night to thank us for it. Their drum dance and all that, and I'm expecting, their beautiful baskets and their crafts and their colored, multicolored clothes. We were going to get all this abundance of things and the guy walks in, he has a goat over his shoulders. And I look at that, and they hand that to us. I go, that's all? This is what I'm thinking. And then I said to the missionary, I said, that was an interesting gift. And he says, you don't know how priceless,
right.
What a sacrifice that was for them to give that to us.
So to kind of build on that, I had the incredible pleasure this year of working, and here's where I'm just in awe of how the Lord can use technology. I worked with a pastor in Rwanda this year, and so my husband is a pastor, and our church sponsored a school and a church building for this pastor and community in Rwanda. And when he found out that that Rich, his wife, did what she did, he reached out and said, would you come and help me? We want to be self-sufficient and we need goats. And they had never had goats. They lived in a beautiful part of eastern Rwanda that was perfect for goats. The closest goat farm to them was almost 6 hours away. I went with him and via FaceTime helped him pick out his goats, helped him get the barn set up. And all of this, I haven't been yet. I have done, I have FaceTimed on how to milk. I have FaceTimed on how to make soap, where the women in this community are learning how to make soap so they can sell it and bring money into their community. We're talking about 80 people who their lives are dramatically changed right now because they added goats to their community. And another beautiful thing, if you have volunteers that are coming to help you and they're afraid of horses, they can do the chores that go with goats. A 5-year-old child can do almost every single chore, even though you don't, even though you may not think that they would be safe around a horse. They don't have to bring a whole bale of hay in, they just have to bring half a flake. They don't have to bring in a full scoop of grain. Goats don't even really love grain, so they only have to bring in half a cup, because most goats can survive on half a cup of grain a day. That's all they need. So every chore, even scooping up their manure, you can use a dustpan and a little rake from the dollar store versus a, pitchfork. Yeah. Everything about them is easier.
Where are you located?
Colden, New York.
Where is Colden, New York?
We're kind of outside of Buffalo. We're about 30 minutes from Buffalo.
So you're cold.
We're at the beginning of ski country too, so yeah, we get a lot of snow. Yeah. Yeah, and goats love the snow. That's another thing. They love snow. They'll go out on a really icy, cold, snowy day and lay in the snow and just sun themselves. They're just amazing. Any other questions? Yeah?
What do you do when you retire a goat?
That's a great question. So when I retire, so I herd breed. So I bring in one buck in January. He stays for 7 weeks. And that way I know 5 months later, my kidding season is only 7 weeks long. When I retire a doe, so I have one doe right now who's getting close. Every other doe that I have retired, I work with another therapeutic farm who takes the retired does and uses them with horses. So they have a huge horse operation. I've only retired 4 so far, but because I've only done this is year 7, right? But I'm hoping and praying that never goes away, that she'll always take my does. And because really, after the age of 7, so the girl that I have right now who's 7, every year from this year forward, I'm going to watch her feet, watch her udder, make sure that her udder is still okay. Their udders get very big, and so they can get blown teats pretty quickly. And as soon as that happens, you don't want to breed them anymore. But another thing too, like financially, goats are low cost. They are, even though they can get parasites, for the most part, even their parasite control is fairly minimal. Their vet bills are very minimal. When my vet comes, we do a whole herd check in March, and she does all the shots. They only need CD&T. It's $300 for 20 goats.
Versus one horse.
Right. Yeah. No, they're easier. They're just another tool, right? We all just need tools to help these communities that we service. That's what we need. And every tool, if you let the Lord use it and move people's hearts with it, changes kingdom. And that's our ultimate goal, right? We want the kingdom to be bigger and hell to be smaller. And especially right now, I feel like we're all living in for such a time as this time, where we just need to really dive in and help these people and help them connect with Jesus. And if we can do that, man, we will change the world. Yeah. And that's sort of my mission statement, is I'm changing the world one therapy goat at a time. Yeah. All right. Any other questions before? Forgot to set my timer. Are we close? Oh yeah, we're close. Yeah.
Can you call them therapy goats just because if you're not a therapist,
Absolutely. So if you look, I do have to sometimes register them as therapy animals for some town boards. I don't do it with all of them because it's an extra $189 in our area. And that's a lot of expense to add just to make a town board happy. So if I don't have to do it, I don't do it. But because of the program that I've built, yes, they qualify as a therapy animal.
how do you know, like, I'm from Pennsylvania, how
I just called. I call every town. So every town is different. Western New York, luckily most villages are different. Most villages are a hard no. But the town board, call the town and just ask for their bylaw on either a therapeutic animal or a livestock. And they'll usually have 2 levels, so there's large livestock and small livestock. Small livestock is usually chickens, bunnies, and goats. Large is sheep and alpacas and llamas and horses and cattle. But each state is a little different, and even each town is a little different. In our area, I have a few towns that are hard no's, and I just know if you don't have 5 acres, they're going to be a hard no. Luckily, Western New York, where I live, if you have 5 acres, you have the right to farm. And so they can't say no to anything, even large livestock, unless you're in a village, which I don't know if that's true in other states, but in our state, the difference between town laws and village laws are very different. But that therapy animal status, it is like a nationwide website that you go on where you apply for, and even though it seems silly, that $180, if you have a town board that's being a little picky, it immediately changes them. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, you can have that. Sometimes they give us conditional variances, and then, in a year or 2, I go back in front. Most of the families that buy animals from me, they get multiple. So they'll get 2 one year, 2 the next year, until they build their herd. They have no interest in breeding. They have no interest. They want me to do all the hard work. They just want to cuddle. Yeah. But I have 6 that I have registered as therapy animals, because they're the ones that I take to nursing homes, or I might take, like this year, I don't know if any of you were familiar, but we had a pretty awful racially motivated shooting at a Tops a few years ago, and there were 14 people killed in a almost exclusively African American neighborhood, very socially depressed, very economically depressed. And there's a very large school there called the Buffalo School for Performing Arts. And every year I bring my goats to their send off to school party, and for me it's next week. Their main psychologist is a Christian. She prays over them, and somehow this school lets it all happen, which is just a beautiful thing, because that's not often the case. I pray for my goats every day, that everybody that they come in contact with is going to feel the presence of the Holy Spirit and feel the Lord in every touch, every breath. Because let's admit, that's part of it, right? You walk into a barn, oh man, there is nothing better than the smell of an animal. And goats have a really unique smell. They kind of smell spicy. It's really interesting. They're very different odor-wise to any other livestock. When you bury your face in them, you're like, I don't know what I'm smelling, but I love it. It's good. Yeah. Yeah.
They sound so remarkable. Can you housebreak them?
You can. Except, so they will go in a litter box, a big bin, but you can never teach them to not be curious. They will figure out how to open the fridge. They will figure out how to open the pantry. They will figure out where you keep the snacks. They will jump on every countertop and knock everything off. So I've learned a lot in 7 years. And first year I created 2 monsters, and one of them is Phoebe, and she eats clothes because she was a bottle baby, and I fed her like every good human does, oh, my sweet baby, you're so cute, right by my shirt, and then she would lick my shirt, and oh, my heart, it was so cute. And now she makes everyone's shirt look like Lorraine Swiss. She chews shirts like it's her job. Now, when I have a bottle baby, my love is one, my food is another. So I feed the baby goats like this. And I even push them sometimes. If they're bumping me too hard, I become a mama goat, and I'm like, nope, and I push them. I don't talk to them. I don't make eye contact with them. It is the hardest thing I ever did, was to change my point of view on how I was caring for these animals. I wasn't being a good steward. I was being human. You know, I was like, oh, you're so cute. I love you. And instead, I became a steward. And I'm like, I do love you. I love you enough to raise you the way your mother would have raised you. And that is, you give them a bottle from behind, you don't look at them, you don't talk to them, and you push them away with your foot like a mama goat would when they're done.
The other thought with the housebreaking thing, when you take a goat into like a nursing home and things like that, can you keep them from potting in the?
Yeah, I use Great Dane diapers and poise pads.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, goat berries are like marbles. Occasionally a marble will like roll down the road. But if they're willing to have me in there, they're willing to tolerate a goat berry or two. But yeah, yeah, exactly. I do too. I call them goat berries. I have this little, he was 4 the first time he came. He's like 15 now. He was so cute. I hadn't even really started doing this. He was one of my very first like indicators from the Lord that this is the direction I was supposed to go in. And he came running on the farm, and his mom is a friend of mine, and he's like, Mom, there's blueberries everywhere. And she looked at me and she's like, oh my gosh. And I said, did he eat them? Like,
I had one.
and she's like, buddy, did you eat them? Oh my gosh, I'm gonna cry. And he said, no, not yet, Mom. And he ran, and she just screamed out, dude, it's poop. And so goat berries they became. Yeah, they will forever be goat berries. Yeah.
When you sell your little boys, are they already with us?
Yeah. I don't, sorry you guys, that went down the wrong way. I'm good for now. I don't actually encourage any of my families to breed. I encourage them to let me do that. Because we are notoriously bad at raising animals the way their parents raised them. And baby goats are no different, right? They're actually, mine, they're 1.5 pounds to 3 pounds, right? I mean, come on. All you want to do is love them and cuddle them and hold them. And you end up with just a disaster. Like it is. And that's why I also keep them for 12 weeks, because at 12 weeks, they're usually big enough that they don't really want to be held anymore. But at 8 weeks, which is when they can technically leave, they're still super cuddly and cute and sweet. And you can really quickly turn a very cute, sweet goat into a monster. And I mean, I've done it. Like, I've changed my whole program to really make sure that I don't create monsters, that I create therapy goats. And if anybody wants to do it, I have a whole file that I'm happy to send you on how I do it. It's not hard. It's just a lot of being a mama goat. Yeah, so I think that's it, unless anybody has any other questions. Great. You're very welcome. I have a vendor table out, and I will tell you, I was a really great chef for 20 years. I'm a much better soap maker than I ever was a chef. And talking about the miracle of soap is a whole other hour. The truth is, like, that is another gift from the Lord, is soap. So I do. Yeah, I do. No. It's not hard. Anything he gives us that's provision is never hard, right? It's usually incredibly easy. We just make it hard because we're like, wait, I think I could do better than God. Let me try this, right? But the truth is, as long as we stick to his plan, it's almost always easy. That's one thing I've learned in 7 years. As long as I don't rely on my own intelligence and I just rely on his, oh my gosh, my life is so, like, sweet. You know, even the hard stuff doesn't seem hard. Yeah. So check out website. It's RowandaleTherapyGoats.com. I have cards down at the soap table down there too. And yeah, I'm here. I love emails. I love talking. I love sharing my farm. If you ever want to take a drive, I know it's a little far, but
How far
I think it's about 3 hours from Clymer.
Okay.
Yeah, so Clymer is, might be a little less. What big city is Clymer? Is it on the other side of Rochester?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think,
Closer to Erie.
so it might be like 2.5 hours.
Okay.
Not far. Not far.
Kids live in Erie.
Yeah, that's what your husband said. That's great. Yeah, I have a feeling you're getting a couple of goats next year.
Okay, sounds good.
You're welcome. You're welcome.